to talk about how history is linked to personal knowledge. Unlike what most people think, history is not the past, but it is the study of past events. In other words, history is our interaction with these past events. This is the reason why history is constantly being reviewed and updated. These reviews and updates depend to some extent on the perspective from which a certain event is being studied from. History tends to be constructed through the interaction of individual historians who share their personal knowledge and thoughts on a certain event. History is almost entirely based on evidence, and the opinion each historian makes of this evidence. Historians try to use as much widespread and varied pieces of evidence as possible to avoid building a biased picture of the past. For example, we can take a look at different perspectives of the Russian Revolution from two different historians, Steve Smith from the University of Essex and Chris Reed from the University of Warwick. They give other individuals their opinion on the Russian Revolution, which therefore makes their personal knowledge and opinion become shared with others. However, the historian's objectiveness in choosing the evidence can sometimes be questionable. A wide range of evidence can be available, but a historian might choose not to use it. Instead, they are keener to prove a theory they have already developed, and they are unwilling to contradict what they believe in. Many people will find this to be a very contradictable technique, considering the fact that history is a constant questioning of our own theories when discovering new evidence.
How do we know that history is fact? We cannot always know that the history that we are reading is fact. Some history may be considered fact because of concrete evidence that has been found in multiple eyewitness accounts. Other historical events that historians argue about cannot be considered fact because there is not enough evidence of the occurrence of these events, and eyewitnesses are no longer living. For some things, we have to assume that the historians are correct in their presentations of the evidence that is available to us. In books and textbooks written by historians, we have to assume that they have adequately assessed the reliability of the sources that they have included in their arguments and statements. The cliché, "history is written by the winner," is a huge part of knowing if the history that we read is fact, especially history of war. For example, wars that occurred many years ago cannot always be interpreted as fact because the accounts that we read were often written by the winner of the war, meaning that the losing side was most times portrayed as evil to justify the war. Because of this, we need to read as many accounts as possible from different perspectives of the war. Winner, loser, neutral, to have the best understanding and knowledge of how the war actually went on. This is true not only for history of war, but also for many other things such as politics, economy, culture of countries, etc. An example of when we know that history is fact is the Battle of Stalingrad. Hundreds of eyewitness accounts exist from both the side of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Therefore, historians have had perspectives from both the sides of the war to read and can therefore know for certain that the battle did actually happen. And that most details of the battle are fact. On the other hand, we cannot know that all the details of the battle are fact because that side would attempt. Because for some details, accounts from only one side of the war may be available. Therefore, the statistics and details of some parts of the battle wouldn't be fully accurate because that side would attempt to push the details in their favor to show that they were stronger or more heroic. Furthermore, an example of when we cannot know for certain that history is fact is the Battle of Thermopylae. We do know that the battle happened for a fact because we have different written sources such as Herodotus and Diodorus and also some Persian accounts. What we do not know is most details of the battle because in ancient sources it is usually stated that the Persian army had a number from 1 to 2.5 million soldiers, but recent modern estimates have decided that the number was much lower, around 100 to 150,000. Therefore, we cannot know for a fact that all the history that we read about the battle is in fact, and some may be extremely exaggerated.
How can we trust a history source? For years, learning about an event required to listen to somebody recall an event and their word on it was automatically fact. This is how most stories and epic poems were made. They were true stories that had been passed down generation by generation and altered and modified until they were these glorious tales of strength, power, and will to carry on. In present day, this would be difficult to do, as media coverage around the globe is so strong that 2 minutes after a plane crash, most of the world will already start to know about it. Another thing that is different in our day is access to information. Before we had the internet, if we wanted to learn about something, the only way was to read about it in a book. Or if a book on a topic didn't exist, you could look for somebody who knew about it, or just give up. Nowadays, with a few clicks on a phone or a computer, you can access the internet in places like Wikipedia to find out about anything in a matter of seconds. This does, however, make trusting a source much harder if using a place like Wikipedia, because you are relying on the knowledge of a stranger who may not have any first-hand knowledge on a topic, but is still writing about it. For historians, the best sources are those who have actually witnessed or played a part in history. These are called, first, primary sources, as their retelling of the story will be how they viewed it from their eyes. For example, a book written about Stalin's USSR by a Western historian will of course be written from a different perspective than that of a Soviet citizen, who might have personal experience from this time period. Therefore, the Russian book can be seen as more reliable because it is based on personal experience, whereas the American source may be more biased and based off of maintaining an American image of not supporting the Soviet Union. So the best form of source for history is personal witness, someone who has either written a book about what event, what even they were a part of, or a direct connection to a witness from writing a book. Basically, first-hand experience is the best source for history.
One aspect that must be always referred to when we're talking about history is time. And time is a very important aspect of a historical interpretation. How does time affect a historical interpretation? Time is not only responsible for the perspective which a particular historical source exhibits, yet it is also responsible for a potential alternation of many historical interpretations. And on that note, to state what has been already stated by Lauren and later before in the video, history is the telling of the past. But yet to be more specific, the way in which we understand that telling of the past is greatly affected from our own past and experiences, all of which determine our personal perspective. And that is because, to a large extent, the people who do write history change as well. They don't change physically, yet their perspectives change, as over time, they may have been exposed to different experiences that alter their perspective on a particular subject. For example, prior to the Civil Rights Movement between 1954 and 1968, historical sources of how society operated in the United States were dominated by further educated white people who discriminated the black population of the country. However, as the country progressed out of that racially discriminating period, the interpretation of events involving both white and black people may have changed, either because the Civil Rights Movement changed the perspective of a white individual on the black society of the country, making him less racist, or because the Civil Rights Movement resulted in the access of black people to education and potentially allowing them to exhibit their personal perspective, which means that because of the time we were provided with insights from all sides, which can thus change in historical interpretation. Another example of how time can alter a historical interpretation is the famous phrase, "Let them have cake" by Marie Antoinette, or at least thought to be said by her. For centuries, it's been thought that the phrase said by Marie Antoinette was a crucial contributor in the eventual outrage and uprise of the peasants against the French royal family. However, recent discoveries show that Marie Antoinette was 11 at the time the phrase was spoken, a time when she wasn't the Queen of France, suggesting that the quote may have been instead said by Maria Theresa, Spanish princess. Therefore, time can greatly affect and change a historical interpretation, as with time, new sources are found that change a historical fact. However, time doesn't necessarily have to affect a historical interpretation, as in many occasions there are not any other sources left to be explored, and the fact that something has definitely happened may not change as time goes by. An example would be, let's say, a failing IB student who failed his IB exams in 2015. And that is an interpretation that won't change as the fact that the student failed his exams in 2015 is certain. Therefore, time can indeed affect a historical interpretation in a variety of ways, yet that may not be the case with all historical interpretations.